Yo, what is up? This is Vinamre Kasanaa. If you're new to our channel, please subscribe because we release new episodes every Tuesday and Friday at 12 p.m. Indian Standard Time. If you're listening to this podcast on an audio platform like Spotify, Apple Music, or whatever else you listen to podcasts, make sure to give us 5 stars. Really helps bump us up in the rankings, and we're trying to be the best in Bharat. This episode, I had the good privilege of speaking to S. Vijaykumar, author of this book, The Idol Thief, the true story of the looting of India's temples. Amish Tripathi swears by this book. Now, the reason I had S. Vijaykumar on the podcast is because he has been documenting the looted Indian antiquities all across the world in reputed museums and galleries and trying to get them back to India and in the temples that they actually belong in. His book also covers the story of notorious art dealer Subhash Kapoor, who rose to infamy internationally by stealing and looting several important Indian religious sculptures and idols and then selling them off to galleries all across the world and then eventually being caught. Currently he's in jail. S. Vijaykumar was instrumental to getting him caught at his infamy. I guess Subhash Kapoor had idols and artifacts above $200 million or $300 million in just holdings. So you can imagine the kind of racket, the kind of investigative art crime flavor to this particular podcast. And I think S. Vijaykumar has a breadth and a depth of knowledge that is not surmounted by anyone else in the art crime world, if you can call it that. There's going to be a little bit of echo on S. Vijaykumar's side, probably because of the nature of the room that he was recording this from. Do not let that distract you from this wonderful conversation. I can attest to the fact that by the end, you will have an idea about the extent of art crimes in the world. Having said that, the episode with S. Vijaykumar begins in 3, 2, 1. Hey, how do I say your name? S. Vijaykumar? Should I say Vijay? What do I prefer?
Vijay is fine.
Vijay is fine. Vijay, man, I've, like I said 3 times before this, I'm going to say it again. I've been reading your book the entire morning, and I have a series of notes about the work that you've done in terms of repatriating idols in India, artifacts in India, and chasing the elusive Subhash Kapoor in the capacity that you have. Before I kind of set the groundwork for our discussion today, I wanted to tell people about your book, which is The Idol Thief. Now, it was written about 4 years ago, but I think this is a kind of book that the contents of it are pretty eternal. Because from what I know, idol looting keeps happening all across the world. But to set the groundwork for this now, obviously people know about this story a little bit because you've done other interviews as well. So I wanted to take a different tangent. Let's talk about the context of Indian temples, and then how were idols or artifacts looted from Indian temples in the colonial era or the era before, and how are they being looted, if at all, now? What are the differences? Can we just start with the chronology of that?
So in terms of timelines, I would like to put this into 3 distinct brackets. One, we classify colonial loot from, say, the 17th century onwards. We've been losing our gods. So idol is because the Western world calls it idols. I think in our world, we call it murtis because idol has a lot of negative connotations in the Western world. But for us, these are living gods, especially from my home state in Tamil Nadu, and especially my field of specialty, Chola bronzes. Chola bronzes are considered to be the high watermark of Indian art and thus carry a big price tag in the West. But in Tamil, which I speak, they are called Tirumeni. Tirumeni literally translates to body of God. So these are treated as living gods. They would be woken up in the morning by singing songs. They'll be bathed. They'll be dried. They'll be ceremoniously flayed. Ornaments put on to them. In the night, they would go back to their sleeping quarters by singing songs, and they'll be put to sleep. So, and festivals would happen to them, weddings would happen to them. The priests would literally look at them as living gods, like sometimes you see them rushing back home to bring ceremonial rice because they feel the deity is hungry. So the priest would actually be running to bring the prasad, saying that God is waiting. So that's how they are looked up. So our icons have in the past been targeted more for, let's say, let's when the colonizers came in. And here we're not talking just the British, we're talking the Dutch, the French. They looked at us as the wild east, and we were like a tribe of barbarians, and they would not believe that this civilization could come up with highly sophisticated art. And I would say that the problem that we see in India at that point of time is that we were very gullible. And when the white man came, and the white man comes with his, Sahib, a lot of gullible people were cheated of their gods. And I'm talking about a few examples for you, colonial times. There is a case where in Trankebar, which was a Dutch colony, the Dutch collector is expanding his fort, and in fact, he writes notes back to his office saying that, we've been running this mission. This is in the 18th century, a church. And he literally writes to them saying, don't spend money on the church. We've been feeding them, educating the locals. But when they go home, they go back to worshipping their stone gods. So he says, give me money to expand my fort. And he expands his fort. And technically, he has this, let's say, rights that he signed with the local king, which tells that he can build a fort for a period of 2 years. He builds the fort and he comes across a buried hoard. Now, the concept of buried hoard is again something that I think need to be introduced to the audience, because there's a lot of, let's say, arguments, because my book is a non-fiction book, but the first chapter technically is something that happened in the past. In the early 14th century, a lot of iconoclasts came into India. There are a lot of artifacts that were destroyed. Metal icons would be burnt, melted, stone deities would be mutilated. So the custodians at that point of time took steps as described in our, let's say, for want of a better word, canons called the agamas, where they say, in face of a hostile threat, what should you do to safeguard your gods? So they were buried for safety ceremoniously, or if there's no time, they will be dropped into temple ponds and lakes, with the hope that when the threat passes away, they would be brought back and reinstated for worship. But for some reason, where today's scholars have been largely silent, they were never reinstated back. And the only two options that come to my mind were the custodians were either driven away or they were killed protecting their secrets. Now, the threats lasted in some cases for 6 months to a year max. So the second option, that they were driven away when they went to such great extents to safeguard the deities that they didn't have the time to bring them back to the temple, defies logic. So today, across India, we get these buried hoards. You take it Assam, Orissa, West Bengal, Bihar, Gujarat, Telangana, Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu. We get a lot of these buried hoards coming out of the earth, and the gods are coming back. One such buried hoard was found by this Danish collector called Peter Anker. He stumbles on a hoard of 30 bronzes. The locals cry, pray, because these were their gods, literally bronzes that have been buried for over 600 years, that time 400 years. But he takes them forcefully, takes it back and sells it to the then Prince of Denmark, and currently they're exhibited in the Royal Danish Museum, with a note that he bought them from the locals. So when I went and looked at the original Danish records, he gave them a bag of rice and some betel nuts. And this was the so-called payment for 30 bronzes. And he says that the locals, he told them that they've lost power, these gods, because they've been buried for so long. There is no temple that can accept them, which is blatant lie, because just 400 meters from the fort as it stands today is an old Chola temple, still extant by the beach, that originally should have had these bronze icons. So
Yeah.
similarly, a lot of these colonial loot, we have classic cases where Peter Curzon took a set of bronzes from Coimbatore to buried hoard. And there's another story of another British collector in Calcutta goes on a morning cruise to hunt, let's say, I think oysters. and he finds this ruined temple of Vishnu, and he takes back a few murtis with him when he goes back. So we've been plundered for a long time. In the 1920s, the West opens up to the concept of our gods, especially the French. So there is this Chinese collector called C.T. Lu who opens a let's say dealer in Paris who opens his own showroom called the Pagoda Paris, Red Pagoda he builds, and he basically starts selling Chinese artifacts. But then
Mm-hmm.
he realizes that there's a demand for Indian art, especially Chola bronzes and other Hindu icons and Buddhist icons. And he recruits a scholar called Dubriol, who used to be in Pondicherry, the then French colony. And Dubriol, masquerading as a scholar, works with C.T. Lu and the Musée Guimet for about 20 years, and they plunder over 1,000 icons, smuggle it out of Chennai, Tamil Nadu, into Pondicherry, Andhra Pradesh, and CT Lu becomes the front. Dubriol is a supplier, and they have, in fact, have an agreement wherein you take all the bronzes, the bronze in the Rijksmuseum, the bronze in the British Museum. Most of the bronzes currently in the West were all. So if you just Google CT Lu, you will know what he supplied or he sold, and these were all illegally moved from then French colony of Pondicherry. And in fact, there is a confidential police report talking about the 1920s idols being sent from Tamil Nadu into smuggled out, but then that report is just a name report. We don't know what happened after that. So this has been happening for a long time, colonial loot. Sadly, there's not much legal basis for return of colonial loot. We can only request to do the right thing. History must return to its geography. But the good thing is people are realizing, and I think the current generation don't want to be associated because these are basically war trophies. If you really look at it, it's conquest and plunder, and they don't want it to be a scarred remain signs. And I'm happy that the Glasgow Museum, for the first time last year, returned a set of 12 objects taken during the colonial time. The very first time India has ever got back, which included three murtis, a ceremonial squad. So it started. So the colonial period, it started. I think we are cracking that part. And then there is a time from between 1947 and 1970, which was, I would say, the main time when we lost almost the majority of our best of Indian art to looters, wherein they were smuggled out many times to the diplomatic bag. Diplomats leaving India used to go back with artifacts to line their gardens and a lot of things. And that's when a lot of our scholars got involved. When I say scholars, soul scholars, many of them, I don't want to even call it by the correct name, Lotus awarded scholars, trying, working hand in glove, taking these smugglers on recce trips that forced India and Italy actually to campaign against illicit trafficking of antiquities to the UN. And we managed to rally support. And in 1970, the UN came up with a convention, but then, the UN is as toothless as it was today. They
Mm.
couldn't put it in retrospective effect. So the 1970 convention is basically saying that henceforth, we'll all behave well. And it's like co-opt, you opt to sign into it. And these nations call us source nations, as though we are some mine or supplying factory. So we, when I say we, India, Egypt, Italy, Cambodia, Nepal are all called source nations.
All former
And
colonies.
culture rich places where we you stumble anywhere, you will find something that's over 1,000 years old. And these countries basically, okay, at least they said, okay, from 1970 at least, the convention is very simple. If you can prove that it is a theft that happened after 1970, you don't have to go to courts. All you have to do is use the convention, and the other country that currently has artifact is a signatory. They have 30 days to refute your claim. If not, the object to forfeit to India or to the source nation. So this is an enabler. So the UN Convention, again, largely misunderstood, where the Western world and the museums think that the 1970s, some Lakshman Rekha that miraculously washes a stolen object. It doesn't. If there is a stolen object, continues to be a stolen object. Common law clearly states that a thief cannot transfer title. It's like somebody, all these pawn houses which deal in stolen jewelry. When they get caught, they have nothing. So they just have to give up.
Right.
Similarly, the Western world, when they are caught with the stolen stuff, if it's pre 1970, India has its own patrimony laws going back to 1878, where you had the Buried Treasure Trove Act. So we have to go to court. So if it's after 1970, we invoke the convention. So the convention is only an enabler. It doesn't. So the art market gave its own interpretation. So now what happens is they get a letter, a fake provenance letter. Provenance is like, a title deed which describes the history, the background story of the object. So going back to the villain of my book, Kapoor. So he and another scholar recently, which we exposed, Emma Bunker, who used to work with another British Thai smuggler called Douglas Latchford, who's since deceased. They used to collect old letterheads of shops in India and other dealers, get an old typewriter, and they would type a receipt saying, I bought this in Delhi, in Calcutta in 1968, 1969, 1970. And that single sheet of paper was all the due diligence that museum did to say that it is bought before 1970. And somehow they feel, yeah, we've done our checks, no
Yeah.
red
And how much would
flags.
these sell for? How much would like these typefaces of Indian signboards sell for?
See, for me, our murtis are priceless, so I don't want to put a price tag. But
No, I don't mean the
unfortunately,
murtis. I mean
yeah,
the typefaces that you mentioned, the Indian signboards.
I think they just get it printed artificially aged. They're artificially aging murtis now, so I think they
Hmm.
just print them. So these jokers basically use these. Uh, so they pay pittance to the local smugglers, but
Hmm.
post 1970, a strange thing happened, wherein the rich collectors, Hollywood, let's say the rich or the famous, the world's richest man, for example, Norton Simon at that time, he was not just the richest man in the world, he was richest man in the history of the world. He starts collecting because his third wife, when they came on a honeymoon to Delhi in 1971, met one of those soul lotus scholars, and he encouraged them to buy Indian art. And he spurged $1 million on an Nataraja. And there are two or three such cases which we have successfully fought, but there are hundreds of cases that India was never, let's say, going after its treasures. At some point, it became like a red herring. So if you go to a shop overseas in Paris, they have an Italian artifact, they have an Indian artifact, they have a Comor artifact. You would confidently buy an Indian artifact because India didn't care. And I say this with numbers. So Italy and India jointly started this race in 1970 after the UN Convention. Italy created a national art squad under the Carabinieri police. They have so far recovered close to 148,000 artifacts. And these are basically, most of them are pottery shards and potteries, amphora vases from tombs, not from, okay, there are a few church paintings and other sculptures, but compared to India, wherein we're talking about active worship sites that have been smuggled and targeted. India brought back 19 antiquities, 1 9 in the same period from 1972 to 2000. 2000 to 2012, it was zero. 2012 to now, we have crossed 600.
Yeah.
So we're still scratching the surface, but it's important for us to understand the context because in 1998, a British journalist called Peter Watson exposed one of the premier auction houses called Sotheby's in London. And they used to send their India experts on sales trips to India. They used to come, literally, I've seen their travel bills where they meet smugglers. And Peter Watson actually did this book called Sotheby's The Inside Story, where there's one chapter on India.
Hmm.
They used to come on recce trips, pick and choose the best of Indian art, and then they were robbed. So this was not some random theft happening. This was
Wait,
a
wait, wait,
targeted.
wait, wait. You're saying Sotheby's got their people inside India, and then they tipped off smugglers to rob the things that they wanted.
Yeah.
They worked in tandem with smugglers.
Yes.
And how was this allowed? How was, let's dial it a step back. How is it that there's such a big nexus of people who are at reputed art institutions operating with smugglers, and how is any artwork looted in places where there is maximum security, where there is
Well, there is no security even now. So the problem is again scant loss. So you'll be surprised to know in India there is no section for art crime. There is no section for temple theft. They're all tried under IPC 380, which
Mhm.
is housebreaking theft, which
Right.
carries a maximum penalty of 3,000 rupees and 7 years. And in my home state of Tamil Nadu, 1993, they bought a stupid amendment. The amendment was bought in good earnest. They said the minimum penalty was 3 months. The maximum penalty was 7 years. They said, look, temple theft, we should keep a minimum penalty of 3 years. But when they did the amendment in 1993, they forgot the word minimum. So
Mm.
in Tamil Nadu, the amendment says temple theft 3 years. So it's now been interpreted that the maximum penalty for temple theft in Tamil Nadu is 3 years. So anywhere in India, you rob a
Mhm.
temple is 7 years. In Tamil Nadu is 3 years. Number two, if you rob a house in Tamil Nadu, it's 7 years. You rob a temple in Tamil Nadu, it's 3 years. The amendment still stays. Compared to it, consider the amount. So in 1971, when we lodged a case against a Canadian company importing an Atraja via London, they had purchased it for $1 million.
Mm.
So we are talking about on one side a scant penalty, very little jail time, and if they succeed in moving out, $1 million windfall. And this is a potent recipe for disaster.
Yeah. So how is it that, for example, let's just say you mentioned there are a bunch of Nataraj idols. There's a few other Indian gods as well, uh, in the various temples of India, which are sourced by people, and then they have an absurd price put on them, and then they're sold for
See,
millions. How
earlier,
do these things get priced?
so first, how they smuggle it out of India is to just answer the second part of your question. Earlier, what they used to do, they used to make replicas. They
Mm.
would show the replica to get the export permit to say it's a newly made one. And we have a stupid rule there you get a non-antiquity certificate, and it is not something that's stamped, it's like a tag, and it allows you to export it for 6 months. Simple, they showed the duplicate, got the export license, and shipped off the original.
But okay, so one more thing. So I mean, I'm just talking as a layman because I'm not in this world at all. So just to
Sure.
understand, let's say you've got a temple in Uttar Pradesh or a temple in a part of Tamil Nadu, right? And it's a fairly modern temple. We're not talking about the 80s or the 90s. We're talking about now. You've got a bunch of pujaris, a bunch of priests. You've got like the temple governance board of some kind, right? And you've got some idols that are placed there, right? In the temple. Now, if I'm a smuggler, what will I do? Will I go in and I speak to the priest
See,
and I'm like, hey, can I get this? Can we barter a deal? Like, what happens there?
okay, so thefts happen from four different types. One is active worship sites, movable deities. There are immovable deities. Movable deities are typically bronze images that you can come in and take. The immovable deities are what we call coastal murtis. So when you come at the shrine, they are granite deities that are fixed on to columns on the wall, and sometimes these are broken. We have had cases where robbers come in the night, chop off the heads. There are literally headhunters going after heads of our gods. And there are guys who actually, there's a case of a Varaha, which is the form of Vishnu. It weighed 5 tons. This is a freestanding statue. The robbers put a chain around its leg, yanked it to a truck, and pulled it, breaking off the legs because the leg was anchored to another 10-ton stone pedestal. And this Varaha is currently with a dealer in Switzerland. We're still trying to get it back. So this is under worship sites where they're mutilated, and then to transport them, some of these were so huge that they're deliberately cut into pieces. We've had cases where we're currently working on a yakshi from Uttar Pradesh, Parvut,
A what? A
that
what?
is, yeah, a yakshi goddess
Okay.
statue from the second century BC. It was a registered antiquity with a farmer. He was worshipping her as a Kuladevata, and she was registered immediately after by the Indian Antiquities Act of 1978. It was stolen in 2004. The robbers cut her into three pieces, smuggled it out because it was easier to ship in parts. They got a restorer in UK, in the US to stitch it back, basically fix it back, and she was in the market for $15 million.
What?
Yeah. And now, thankfully, she's seized. And when she returns to India, which we expect anytime soon, she will be the world's most expensive restituted object. And there have also been cases where I'm currently tracking a Buddha sculpture from the 10th century Chola period, stone sculpture. It's about almost 8 feet tall. It was outside the Hindu temple because, there was Buddhism, Jainism, and Hinduism coexisted for a period and there was strife in between. This was smuggled out to New York. Subhash Kapoor loaned it to a museum, prestigious museum in Singapore, the ACM, the Asian Civilization Museum. It was exhibited on loan from Subhash Kapoor in Nalanda Way, which was a prestigious show, which was opened by the then Prime Minister Dr. Manmohan Singh. And this Buddha goes back to New York after the exhibition with a provenance paper that is exhibited in the Nalanda Way, opened by Dr. Manmohan Singh. And the price goes up from $1 million to $2 million.
Oh.
So, how are they priced? To answer your previous question, they are priced on rarity. So, technically, what we have to understand is legally, as per India's laws, anything over 100 years, stone or metal icons, are banned from export. You cannot export anything over 100 years. You cannot hold anything over 100 years in your house. If you have, you have to register it. When you register it with the ASI, you need to provide the registering officer has to conduct an inquiry as to how you got it. Just don't go in your SUV, pick up a stone idol, and bring it home and you register, which was an attempt. I see you are laughing, which is what the culture minister wanted to do 3 years ago. They wanted to do away with the process of ASI registering antiquities. They want to come up with an online portal where you could just upload a photo and it could be yours, which was possibly what the collecting lobby wanted, and ridiculous as it may sound. So there is an active lobby that is advising people that we should have a vibrant internal domestic market for antiquities. Because why are they getting exported? Because we are not buying it in India. That's their logic. And what we're trying to say is these are not meant to be commodities that should be sold. The original creators did not intend them to be piece of art. That we see them as art is incidental. They were meant for worship and they should be housed in the sanctums. And there was this attempt, literally, there was a call for a tender to amend the Antiquities Act to do away with the registration process. So we have these brain dead people deciding policy, and the collecting. For example, in the US, they've gotten so strict. In fact, the art dealers have been brought under banking security norms like KYC checks they have to do. And we have on record the New York Times quoting that some of the auction houses paid as much as $75,000 to lobbyists to lobby against this stricter regulation. The EU has come up with similar stricter regulations wherein they are controlling art dealers to give a due diligence, like I have checked the provenance. If it's like, for example, you don't get something from India as saying origin Thailand, the dealer has to say, I know that this is, I've checked. They have to give an undertaking. On that side, they're putting stricter, because this art market is something that is unpoliced. Nobody knows. There is no data. Nobody knows who sells, who buys. It's all anonymous market that flies under the radar. And India is going regressive. We don't have an art crime squad, national art crime squad. We don't have even an act for our heritage crime. And we want to dilute an already toothless act.
You mentioned in the end of your book, we're told that Indian art may be better off and safer in a posh foreign museum than in a dusty old temple. Nothing could be further from the truth. Now, this is a reference to something you said earlier, where you said that these gods, essentially gods, right? They've been made art incidentally as a consequence of being uprooted from the same temples. But I'm just wondering why you make the case for that. Like, what is it not going to be harder for temples to, considering how valuable they now are in the eyes of the world, is it not going to be harder for temples to secure them and guard them?
Exactly. See, first, they survived 1,000 years without this temperature control and curatorial support. They have been happy being where they are for 1,000 years before the dollar driven greed of the West uprooted them. Number two, imagine Every guy who's buying an artifact is breaking the law because, as per theory and practice, the tap was closed in 1970. Even if you take the UN statute, you cannot export anything over 100 years out of India. Anybody who is buying an artwork outside of India is committing a crime if they don't do a proper check. And it cannot be like, no, on one side the tap is closed and the water is still flowing the other side. So unless this is akin to wildlife trafficking, the buying stops when the killing stops. So similarly, when the demand for the $1 million price tag, if it goes, when people realize that they are not buying art, they are buying, and this is proceeds of crime, our temples will be safe.
Yeah. Um, so when it comes to India's own laws, its own government, its own will to kind of go and get back some of the idols, some of the artifacts, where do we stand that in that domain currently? Is beyond
I'll just
the
give you
yeah.
numbers in comparison. Nepal brought back more than 1,000 in the last 4 years. Cambodia has brought back more than 1,000 in the last 10 years, and we are still crossing 600. I think it's still the probability for the iceberg. But I think in the past, people used to say that, art crime, we see it in movies in the 1960s, 70s, but nobody, in fact, I think mine was the first book on this subject, number one. Number two, for a long time, including the custodians, whenever this matter comes up in parliament, you would always see single digit numbers of theft. And whenever I speak, I say that we are losing about 10,000 major works of art every decade. That's 1,000 major works every year. I was not taken seriously till Operation Hidden Idol happened. So if you've read the book, U.S. Homeland Security did the search and seizure warrant in 14 known warehouses in New York. Subhash Kapoor's closing stock was raided, and they seized 2,622 objects valued at $108 million. That's about 900 crores as of today's value. This was unsold stock in known locations. His sister is still hidden two Natarajas and two bronzes valued at $18.5 million. And recently they have found two more storage lockers now post the book. But imagine this: Subhash Kapoor was a medium sized dealer who ran his business for 35 years out of Manhattan. His holding stock, his closing stock was 900 crores worth of artifacts from India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka,
Mm.
Bangladesh, Nepal, Cambodia. Majority from India. And these are not just Hindu deities. We've recovered stolen Buddhas, Jinas, Indus seals, anthropomorphic Indo-Gangetic forms. So anything of age is valued by the West, and that's where people say, "Oh, but India cannot safeguard. India doesn't have the wherewithal to do excavations. Let them remain buried." Maybe after say 300 years of foreign rule, we are still coming out of it. Maybe the next generation, we have enough on our plates that we can focus on art. What great king's history lies buried, we don't know, because people don't realize an illicit dig reduces the context. It reduces an archaeologically significant object to a showpiece curio. The moment a guy is digging illicitly, he will take what is sellable. Maybe he finds a gold coin, he finds some artifact or an ornament. He's going to throw away the pottery sherd. He's going to throw away vital evidence that can date or bring light to a new dynasty. He's going to throw all that away. He's going to close the area because he does not want to have signs. So what he has done, he's reduced an archaeological significant site, he's reduced an archaeological significant find into a showpiece curio. It can only go to a rich collector's bedroom and sit there. It's lost all its value. So by talking about this notion of that we cannot, the colonizers already had a concept called partage, which meant that during the colonial period in Egypt, for example, the French and the Americans would come, the British would come and say, "Oh, you don't know how to scientifically excavate. We will excavate, and as part of our fees, we will take the best of it back to UK or Paris." And French, they even go worse. They have in existence a colonial law from Napoleon's time, which basically says any art, whether legal, illegal, smuggled, once it enters France, it cannot be alienated. It cannot go back. And this was because Napoleon had this law enacted in the 18th century.
That's so interesting. Is that the reason why France has some of the highest concentration of museums in the world?
Uh, I don't want to even call them museums. They are house of horrors. Given a chance, we would empty everything if they do the right thing. If they open up and reveal the provenance of every object, I mean, it's they don't have to do any research. All they have to
Uh,
do is open up their archives. They themselves will know that these are illicitly obtained, and it's not common to just say France. We've got objects coming back from Australia, Singapore, Germany, London,
mhm,
Paris, the US. I think the Met is losing almost every other month. They're losing one. And given a chance, I think with what work we have done, they will lose many more Indian artifacts. In
mhm.
fact, I did a sample study of about 400 artifacts from Kashmir in the Metropolitan Museum, all obtained between 1980 and 1990. None of them have any paperwork, and all of these are religious icons from Kashmir. And these are literally blood antiquities.
Yeah. Which I want to ask you something about this. So, I mean, where does the reparation train stop? How ceaselessly will people like you have to go across the world to trace the origin of each idol? And where does it, because at some point, isn't it just fighting like an unwinnable war? And uh,
Well,
yeah.
I would first want to correct it. It's not reparation, it's restitution.
Hmm.
Reparation is basically seeking damages. We are not even talking damages. We don't want the Met to give back their ticket fees where they've shown, or the British Museum to give back. Restitution is basically giving back what is not yours. And that's what we do. And for me, each single restitution is an act of deterrent. It goes against the art market. Now, I know out of the 100 that go out of India, maybe I find one, but that exposes the dark belly of the underworld. Basically, we are going not just against the object. For us, one object coming back is good. I'll tell you the good aspects, but what it does, what you've done with this Subhash Kapoor case, I think there are about 68 guys behind bars, including cops,
Including
restorers.
cops who were
Yeah,
involved in this.
the number two in the idol ring was hand and glove with an artifact. And I want to give you an example. There was this Nataraja that was stolen from Paruvur in 2004. The robbers thought he was made of gold. These are Panchaloga idols, basically five metal objects where ceremonially small quantities of gold and silver, and the particle percentage is 0.001%. So technically, there's no gold or silver. They just added for they're bronze. But these jokers, they found it so beautiful that they thought it was made of gold. They hacked off or sawed off the left hand of the Nataraja, melted it, gave it to a jeweler in Coimbatore. He melted it and said there's no gold. And they said he is lying. And in the argument, he was killed. There was a murder case in 2005. This Nataraja, in his hand-cut condition, was sent via Nepal to London, where a restorer, Neil Perry Smith, made it a new hand, going against all aspects of ethics of restoration. He should have informed the police the moment he saw this Nataraja with axa blade marks, saw marks on his hand, but he didn't do that. He made a new hand, gave it to Subhash Kapoor. They appeared on Subhash Kapoor's catalog of 2000, April 2008, valued
Hmm.
at for $1 million. But then, close to when he was arrested, Kapoor was arrested in September of 2011, a month before he was arrested. This Nataraja, with his new hand, makes a surprise appearance in Tamil Nadu, Chennai. So, without a visa, he's gone all over the world, grew on a new hand, and come back to Chennai, quietly handed over to the police because they were handling law with them to close the case.
Whoa.
And so this is the extent to which cover-ups happened. And the guy who did it passed away last week. He was Dina Dayalan, the main supplier of Subhash Kapoor. He was arrested 5 years after Kapoor was arrested in 2016 after pressure from the US authorities, when evidence, proof, invoices from Dina Dayal supplying to various people, but nothing was done to catch him unless pressure from the US side made them go after him. He was arrested in June 2006, promptly let out on bail. He was 87 years old. He died of cancer last week. And yesterday there was a news item in the press that he had sold a set of temple bronzes to a rich collector in Chennai, and they've gone after them now a week after, coincidentally after he passed. So a lot of these suppliers are all still alive. We've had emails where they say we have favorable officers in customs. We will get your shipment through. So there's a lot of complexity in this, and unlike Tamil Nadu, which sadly I would say is not the beacon, but at least here in Tamil Nadu, we have an idol wing under the CBCID that focuses, that was created in 1985 with much fanfare. It's supposed to have over 1,000 people. By 2008, it was down to nine, but now they've gone up to another 200, 300 now. They are some good officers, but no other state has such a force. Karnataka announced one with much fanfare 2 years ago. We talked to them, we mailed them. So far, they have not even responded back. Calcutta has one, sorry, Kerala has one called the Temple Protection Force, where they've not even found one icon. So, yeah, the other, so for Kapoor, I think so far we've got back almost 400 plus icons. Only 6 cases are lodged on him based on recoveries in the US, all from Tamil Nadu. We had cases in Chandavaram, in Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, which is a Buddhist site. 3 times the same site was robbed. First time they came, they tied up the security guards, dropped the ASI, is a Buddhist site. 6 months later, they came, they drugged the security guards, they robbed the site again. They put police protection. They came 3 months later, they threatened the police guys and they robbed. So, 3 times the same site was robbed. The artifact was recovered from Australia. One more sitting in the Louvre, Abu Dhabi. One was auctioned by Christie's. We've got back one. But still, they have not, there is an FIR, ASI site, they have not lodged a complaint on Kapoor. And the saddest part is Kapoor was finally convicted last month of 3 cases, despite all this host of evidence. And because he was convicted in Tamil Nadu, he got 3 into 3, 9 years, plus one more case. So he's got, because maximum they could charge him only 3 years because of the stupid 1993 amendment. So he's got almost 10 years jail, of which he served time. So he's going to be let out shortly, but then the US will extradite him because he's a US passport holder. He'll go and face time in the US. But there
Mm.
he'll be a business criminal, not a hardcore criminal. So if he had been tried in any one more state, if for example in Chandavaram, if ASI had filed a case,
Mm.
he'd have got 7 more years.
I have a
Number
question about, yeah, I just have a question about not only just Kapoor, the kind of people who are attracted to the world of art crime, right? To what extent? Because you mentioned drugging the security guard, you mentioned tying him up. So when it comes to personality types who come to this, what are the economics behind it? What kind of people come into it, and what measures do they typically use to get like a piece of art?
Well, first of all, it's a problem with our own creators. These bronzes, as I said, are the high water mark, Gupta art. I have traveled like 300, 400 kilometers in Bondoc places to see one Gupta sculpture. So it is a virus that once bites you. I got into this because of the way, the allure. So in fact, I wrote once when I saw this Parvati sculpture that was actioned by the ACM in 2006. I went there for, they had these huge standees announcing the acquisition without knowing that she was stolen. And that's another story. They had basically, when they put out the notice, they had rendered it in PDF in the wrong size. So I could not do the math. So when I went and checked the original one, but the interesting, I blogged and I said she came to life, I became metal. So that
Mm.
is the allure of these deities. They are so beautifully done because they are in the Stapatis, the creators, use these divine proportions that are supposed to excite. So imagine these ceremonial bronzes are coming out of procession, 1,000 people, 2,000 pairs of eyes on them. They should look at him as God. But then you remove the 2,000 pairs of eyes, replace it with one guy, and imagine the allure. You just can't take your eyes off them. They are designed to capture, and I don't know, for some reason. So I've seen these collectors. There's this Douglas Latchford guy. So he got so enamored by looking at a sculpture of Shiva and Skanda. He called his grandson Skanda. He named his offshore trust Skanda Trust, where he hid all these icons. So I think it's basically it's like a fetish.
Mm-hmm.
But then once the old man becomes old or passes away, the sons and grandsons don't want it. So we had this goat-headed deity which we recovered from outskirts of London early part of this year. So this was from Lokahari in UP, and this was stolen in 1998, 88. So the guy who bought it left it out in a English garden. And one of our friends was visiting, he looked at it and said, "Look, there's a grotesque looking statue, only came from, I mean, is it yours?" I said, "I'm bloody hell, I'm searching for it for the last 30 years." And we managed to talk to the owner, and she bought the property. She thought it was garden furniture, it came with the property. So somebody, so this was a deity that was worshipped by the locals, like a spirit. But then it lost all this context. It's sitting moss covered, huge stone sculpture living out there as a garden furniture. Managed to recover back, and she's now sitting in Delhi because the UP government has still not asked for it to go back to site. But yeah, at least she's back to India. So yes, collectors. I think early days collectors, as I said, because of the concept of India as a civilization, they wanted to have a piece of it, colonial rule piece of it. Later, there were other commercial motives. Like now, after Panama Papers, you don't want to, use banking transactions. You go to these free ports. There are 55 free ports around the world. So you buy a room, you have $1 million painting or a 5 million sculpture. You want to transfer $5 million, you just move it from one room to another, no
Hmm.
paperwork. And so people are buying it for investment. Plus,
Hmm.
there is also this scam that happens in the West, in Australia and America, and major mature markets. If you're a rich collector, you donate an artifact to the museum, you get tax breaks apart from a dinner or a room in your honor. So you get a friendly value. So you buy something for £8,000, you give it to the museum after a few years, and you get a friendly value at say £800,000, and you get a tax break that you can carry forward for 4 years. So this is another scam that's happening. The cultural gifts program is another big scam that happens. And lastly, we have now looked at terrorism and terror financing. For example, in Syria and Iraq, we know that Daesh, one of the key, their estimates vary, but we have seen satellite imagery where Daesh was handing out digging licenses for people to illicitly dig for antiquities. So yes,
Oh,
and these are some of the reasons.
The ISIS was also involved in antiquities looting.
Yeah, they were basically giving out digging licenses for people to illicitly dig sites in Syria and Iraq. Now, the issue is that these are some of the reasons why the US or the EU were not great purveyors of art. They didn't do this out of goodwill. No, we want to send Indian murtis back home because for a long time they didn't care. But it was only when they realized that there was this congressional hearing where they showed what is the price of an artifact on, say, $1 million. $1 million, how many belt bombs, how many guns, how many AK-47s can buy. And that's when they realized that the same pipelines that are bringing art from India was also bringing art from Afghanistan and Syria. And that's when they realized that we need to stop, and they started taking aggressive action.
How do you keep track of all of these things, considering most of these artworks are physical? I mean, are you traveling around a lot in the world? Are you looking at
Yeah,
specific art publications to understand it? Do you have a network of people you consult with?
yeah. So I've been doing this since 2006. For a long time, I was sitting in Singapore. I have a day job. I still have a day job. I was in Singapore for about 15 years. And in Singapore, I miraculously got back 2 hours of my life every day because there was no traffic. So I used to use that time to read more about art. I'm largely self-trained. I'm not a trained historian. I didn't study history, at least in school. But uh, in 2013, I met a few friends and we realized that it should not be a one man effort. I did have a team of volunteers right from the start in 2007 8. We were working on it. So we formally called it the India Pride Project. So what the India Pride Project does basically is to encourage people to come forward. So for a long time, people that Murti is lost, or it's gone, never get back. So we've said we want people on the ground because we have this strange concept where police stations are judged by the number of open FIRs. So if an FIR is open, they are like grading points go down. So what the police do, they catch these small criminals and say, "This is the guy who robbed the temple. Idol not found. Close the case." That's
Hmm.
the FIR is torn up, and then they find some other idol. They give it. Oh, okay, you lost two. Keep these two. Please close the case. So there's a lot of these problems that we typically get. But the larger issue is people don't realize that no amount of passage of time washes a stolen object, and we've successfully got back. The oldest I've gone back is 1961. Two thefts happened in the Nalanda State Museum. In the holiest of holy Buddhist sites, 12 bronzes were stolen in 1961 and two more in 1962. Mr. Sanjeev Sanyal was then the economic advisor to Prime Minister, now in the EAC. He told me he was talking to a retired ASI officer, director, and he said, "Vijay, can you solve this crime?" I said, "Look, I know this case, but there was no evidence or photographs available. But lucky this retired officer, Dr. Bishwas, had photographs and some memos from 1961, and he shared it
Hmm.
with me. And luck could have it, we tracked one bronze to the LACMA, the Los Angeles Museum, and we were working to get it back when another friend of ours, we have these network of like-minded, let's say, the Avengers kind of network. So I work with similar-minded people in Nepal, Cambodia, Italy. So one of our friends, Linda, who runs this art crime school in Italy, was visiting TEFAF, which is an art fair in Maastricht, and she said, Vijay, I gave her a list of prospective dealers who deal in Indian art and said, if they're exhibiting anything Indian, send me photographs. That's how we work. We collect old catalogs, we collect auction house records, and we document. We follow online auction sales for anything that is suspicious. I do trips around India. We go to museums every year. We pick two sites with a volunteer team. We go so that we know based on the site, shape, material, we know which at least which state, which dynasty it is from. Based on this, Linda was visiting TEFAF in 2017, if I remember right. And she said,
Mhm.
look, there is another guy who's not on your list selling some Himalayan Buddhas. I said, okay, send me photos. And I still remember to 3:47 a.m. in Singapore when I was getting these messages, and I said, "Shit, I recognize this bronze." And I still remember the WhatsApp chat. I said, I have a match." And we managed to get the Dutch police involved, and they went in and said, "Look, there is a police complaint against this." This is a very tough case because this is a very small Buddha, the Nalanda Buddha, and the robbers actually broken a piece of the Bodhi tree leaf from one side and welded it on the other side to make it look different. But then my visual memory, I play this game where I commit objects to memory. I put them like films. I put it on my wall for a day before my wife takes them off. So I just memorize them. So I knew that it was the same bronze, and we managed to. So this was a dealer based out of London. So he flew it back because he couldn't sell it in the fair. Then we worked with Metropolitan Police. We seized the object. They disputed my claim, and then finally, expert from ICOM was called in, and they accepted a match on August 15th of 2018. The bonds was handed over back to India in London, and the bonds has come back. So we keep doing this. The next year, we got back a Rama set, Rama, Lakshmana, and Sita, stolen in 1978 from a temple. Again, with a dealer in London, one of our volunteers spotted it. We managed to track it for 4 years of searching for it, and finally came up because the temple from where it was stolen in 1978, they had left with and so they had four bronzes, Rama, Lakshmana, Sita, Hanuman, and another Hanuman. So the four bronzes were stolen, and the separate standing Hanuman was the only one left because too big. So the temple for Rama became called a Hanuman temple. So we were searching for a Rama temple because over 40 years, people had forgotten that it was a Rama temple. And then the Hanuman of that group is still stuck in Singapore. Hopefully, it will come back. But then we managed to track it. And when it went back, there was 10,000 people. And I was literally, so you asked me the importance of this. So I showed this family that is in Singapore from the same village, the Hanuman that is still sitting there. The Rama Lakshmana Sita has gone back to the temple to active worship after 42 years. They saw the Hanuman and they prostrated in the museum and started crying because I asked them, I didn't know it was such an impactful thing. When she said, no, my daughter is named after this deity. So imagine that is what it is faith. No? That is faith. And
Mhm.
10,000 people. And we worked with the state government. They said, no, it cannot go to storage. It has to go back for worship. They said, you should do this, you should do that. Within a week, the local businessmen, the villagers, they got a strong room done. They put a police beat. They got CCTV cameras installed. And now you won't believe for every festival, the entire economy of the village has changed. Everybody wants to see this UK return drama. And 5,000, 6,000 people come. There's a shop that's come up. There's a hotel that's come up. And it's literally put the village back on the map.
Wow, you would think that the community would just have like they would not care about putting the idol in a place of their own, but it seems to me that the idea of their gods is really embedded in their psyche, and so the restoration is actually a good thing because it in a way allows people to essentially get back to their roots. um I have a question about Subhash Kapoor because we didn't discuss him at all in the kind of depth that he written the entire book on. Um, in several passages, I noted that he had a kind of a social charm, and he at several times gifted certain artifacts to big museums. How is it that he was able to one evade your investigative skills, but also the world at large, and build a credible reputation as an art
So I
dealer?
think the museums were very opaque. For a long time, when we raise red flags, they will throw us off. they wouldn't reply. I think our credibility over the last 7 years has grown. So now when we ask a question, they take us seriously. So much so that I was in a UN sponsored convention. When I went on stage, a good friend who's security of a head of security for a major museum said, Vijay is up on stage, which museum is going to be exposed, and museum curators of the world beware. So that is the kind of respect that we notorious respect that we have managed. But earlier, the early days, they wouldn't care, and we were also threatened. A lot of my friends were threatened with lawsuits. In fact, we have faced many libel lawsuits, because you should understand that we don't get a lot of support from the local authorities. And I think that's where the changes happened. Recently, there was this case of a Nataraja that came back from London, you see, from New York, where the Prime Minister is holding the brochure with the Nataraja. It was from Pune Nallur, which is just outskirts of Tanjore. It came up with a simple lead. The priest was attending a conference along with one of the volunteers, and he said, "Oh, 1971, something got stolen from a temple. They gave me a replacement idol." So we managed to go back, find a photograph from 1967 in a Photoshop, and with that, when the moment I saw it, I knew it was in New York with a prominent a house, and we gave the proof. It came back, and 6 months ago, all three of us, so my main volunteer, the priest, and my informant, we were there in court, and the temple authority said, Vijay, we want you to physically give it to us. Forget the courts, forget the police. You please give us the idol back. And we had the pleasure of handing it over, go back to the temple, see this actual working. So we want more people to come up and report thefts. We want people not to think that it is an unsolved crime. So we want local authorities to, if they're scared to go to the police, they can reach out to us. We on Twitter, they can look me up at Vijay at IPP or Vijay at poetryinstone. Both the handles are there. In confidence, we're not trying to hide. So what we try to do is in the last couple of years, because our reputation, because we're doing it not for money, we're not doing it for awards or rewards. What we're doing it, only sole intention is to bring back murtis and they go back to worship. So what's happened is a lot of people who have bought it in good faith are returning back these deities, and they're doing it out of they just want to give it back to India.
I see. Yeah. People can obviously follow that, but just before we end things off, still want to discuss Subhash Kapoor a bit, because I don't think you. What I was trying to ask you is, how is it that he was able to evade the public eye for so long? What kind of connections did he make?
Yeah, I think he was connected to a lot of our soul scholars. Number one, the kind of people who are typically the Lutyens of the art world, and these are the policymakers. And we've seen a lot of these high-profile art historians write catalogs for Kapoor. So these are red flags that we would have easily known. But for a scholar who studied this, it should have definitely been a red flag. And if they did not know it, I think it was more complicit. So he was complicit. He used to dine and wine and dine a lot of these people, and there was big money involved. So you connect the dots. And as I said, we have porous borders. And this is what I say, the US, when they say, oh, but you let these objects, because they were declared, the full container loads going out, declared as garden furniture and newly made. I said, you guys are as porous as ours. No, we ship them out as garden furniture. You got them in as garden furniture as well. So we work with capacity building with Interpol, Europol, and customs to stop this, leakage. But as I said, the demand supply, the demand is too high. Somebody is willing to pay 5 million and $15 million. That's a lot of money thanks to the exchange rate. And who do we have? We have one retired policeman or a watchman or a old priest and an old Nataraj lock to safeguard our Nataraja icons. So it's really tough. So Kapoor got away. He gave a lot of gifts, and I think curators were 100% complicit. They knew that these were technical. We've had objects with fresh sand incrustations. So it's not that these were good faith, genuine purchasers who didn't know that they were buying stolen art. They knew it because they bought it because they thought India wouldn't care. They're not discounted us.
Well, I think India has to care with the kind of intensity that you bring to the table, the kind of things you've done and you continue to do. I mean, outside of this, many people I know have referenced your work or complimented you directly to me, or I've seen online discussions about the stuff that you do, and I think that it'll be interesting to also impart a kind of education about physical idols to people? Because it seems to me that, I mean, based on faith, fewer and fewer people go to temples now. But the ones that do are just, and there's nothing wrong with it,
Yeah.
but they're just used to a
Putting
non-antiquity.
their request. Yeah, they just go and put their request like a bank, put their good deeds and atone for their sins and come out. They don't spend time, but I think that is changing. I've seen a
Yeah.
lot of young
No,
blood coming
I didn't
into.
actually mean that. I was going to say that the idols that you see in a temple are usually just made by artisans now, like especially in North India. I don't know if
Yeah.
there are any particular sites where I can go in and witness like an idol
Wow,
that's
there
been
are.
around. Yeah.
I've been, yeah, yeah. I've been like in
Like, what are some
Iran.
examples?
Well, for me, if you list right from Berul, Ajanta, Ellora, Bihar, Gupta sites, and Uttar Pradesh, MP,
But are these
I
places
could
of
run a
worship,
whole
or
list.
are these places of like historical significance?
I would say that, as I said, for one broken, mutilated Gupta era sculpture, we have traveled 400, 500 kilometers. I think it's just that for a long time we were looking at careers to make money. I
Mm-hmm.
think one generation we now have a safety net. I think the next generation is firmly rooted to understand and be inspired by our history. And I also feel that no, I'm not special. A lot of things I've shared a few cases, but a lot more cases where I feel that the gods want to come home, so
Mm.
they just picked me as a vehicle. So it's not that we specifically wanted to get into this. But I got into this for basically this reason. I saw a son ask his father in a very beautiful temple in Kanjipuram, asking, he showed a form of Shiva as Gangadhara receiving Ganges. And he said, Appa, what is this? And the father said Vishnu and walked off. And then when I realized that our own people don't know the iconography, iconometry, and I
Mm-hmm.
started my site, Poetry in Stone, basically to come up with like a dummy's guide to Indian art. That was the initial intention. We were never wanted to be vigilantes, hunting art crime. But one thing led to another. We started blogging about it, and blog got like-minded people in. We started visiting sites to develop more content. At that point, we realized that before we go to a site just for like photography, we need to carry the appropriate lenses, and we don't want to miss anything that we need to see. So we started studying, published any book about the site. And when we went to the site, we find objects missing. And that's when we realized that what should be there is not there. And we ask the questions, they would say, it's in the stock room. You go to the storeroom, they say, it's in the museum, go to the museum, they say, no, here. That's when we realized that something was amiss, and we got into all this. We started tracking art crime. There's a lot of good people who helped us. The media helped us a lot. There's a very good blogger called Jason Fledge, Chasing Aphrodite. His book on Italian art crime was like an eye opener. And in fact, I think before we studied, the smugglers studied it, because the modus operandi was very similar. They actually have profiles like, no longer are they coming physically, like the recce trips are stopped. It's all on social media. So Venus Swayamvar happens where people are bidding on WhatsApp for our icons, on Facebook. So, and what do we have to safeguard? We have a ill-funded, ill-advised, ill-equipped statewide art force. I think it's high time India invest on a national arts card, pick the best of their art and safeguard. And I think it's coming. More and more objects come back. I think the uncomfortable questions will be asked how they went out, and they just can't hide not answering these questions.
And I also think that the with the this kind of revisionist Indic renaissance that we're seeing with politics and books, that should also apply to Indian art, because I don't think enough is spoken about that.
Well, as I said, I don't want to look at my work with a colored lens. For me, a Jain Murti, a Buddhist Murti, in Indus seal or Indo-Gangetic art from Islamic standard, alam, grill, it's all the same. It's all the shared heritage, the ancient wisdom of our ancestors, and our sacred
Mm-hmm.
duty to protect it and have it to the next generation, so that our sons and daughters and great grandsons can see it in India, not in the British Museum or in the Metropolitan Museum.
Yeah, and we don't want to have a parts of our history fragmented all across the world. You don't want to be a world traveler just to find out who you are as an Indian. Well,
Well, it's
yeah.
gross injustice, and I would say that I think the Western world, has to look at objects of faith as subjects of faith. And thank you for your time. It's been a pleasure. No, it's an hour already past. I didn't realize. I told you I speak a lot.
No, but I think what you say has a lot of substance, and thank you for. I mean, I didn't even get to half my questions, but you answered so many of them in multiple deviations. So I definitely want to speak to you in person, because I think that there's a kind of semi lag that happens in a Zoom conversation. But whenever you're in Delhi, I would just like an open invitation to come back on the podcast and speak about your things, speak about all the things that you're interested in, and hopefully catch up on what has happened since you wrote this book in 2018, because I'm sure there's a lot of new developments, right? Till then,
Yes.
people can follow you on, what are your social handles so we can plug them?
So they can, as I said, just Google me, Stolen Idols, or on Twitter, look at India Pride
Hey man, that's
Project,
what I did.
yeah, Vijay at IPP and Vijay at Poetry in Stone. And we are looking at some exciting recoveries happening soon. So you will see us in the papers as well soon.
Well, wonderful. I hope to read your name with the morning coffee.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Wonderful.
All right, man. Take care. Best of luck.
Thank you.
And see you whenever you're in Delhi.